Привет всем!
Hi
Мы
everyone,
iBiom.
we are iBiom. Here is the curatorial team behind the Quantum Critic exhibition, Natasha and Asi. Tell us, what are we doing here? Why spatial? How has life brought you here?
Жизнь довела вас до такого.
Привет, я Наташа. Я
Hi, I'm
Аси
Natasha.
и еще Тиму.
Me, Asi, Timo, and Ramiro. We are the curators of the Quantum Critic project, which is now in its third year. Originally, the project was an exchange between Finland and Russia, and the two previous exhibitions were held in Helsinki and St. Petersburg.
Но в этом году мы решили изменить сложившиеся традиции и провести
But this year, we decided to change the established traditions and hold the exhibition in the metaverse. This is a new experience for us, opening up a geography without borders and giving great opportunities to artists based in other countries. For this exhibition, we invited Russian artists living outside the Russian Federation. We made an open call and selected 11 artists. 5 of them are represented in the physical exhibition currently taking place in Helsinki, and 6 are represented here in our exhibition on the spatial platform.
представлены здесь на нашей выставке на платформе Special.
Also, the artists whom we initially selected are represented here. They are guest artists from Finland and the Baltic countries, and that's how we got this mix of different artists. So, the different artists had slightly different tasks and goals.
И, соответственно, у разных художников были немного разные задачи и цели. Ася у нас больше...
Asi is more responsible for the technical aspect. I think you can tell us why
Давай ты тебе
spatial?
расскажешь, почему Special?
В моей практике
I study the universes that exist in the world today in my practice. I look at where brands go and why. And absolutely every platform has its own target audience and its own mission.
и абсолютно у каждой
For example,
площадки
Roblox has a target audience of 10-year-olds, and it's basically a really gamified platform, so it's not our method of interaction. There are other completely different formats of project creation and tasks.
площадка это не наш метод.
Or for example, why we didn't use a private platform, because it's very important to us that the platform is open. And Spatial today is a social network, maybe of the future generation, so I see it as the same Instagram, only in the 3D
Нам очень
world.
важно, чтобы площадка была открыта,
Because there is free registration, free possibility to create platforms, and absolutely adequate conditions of realization for
Я его
creators.
воспринимаю как тот же самый Инстаграм,
I
просто
mean, the Spatial team itself, I've been following it for many years, since 2019. It started in 2018, as far as I know. They're just developing more and more every year. They're adding an unreal amount of some nitty-gritty stuff in there.
реализации, то есть сама команда Spatial, я за ней слежу очень много лет.
And they have a huge tutorial, a guideline of how people should use Spatial. If they're just a spectator, if they're here to play, or if they want to become a creator. And so in the world of virtual interaction, I think Spatial is like Instagram, I guess.
Гайдлайн того, как людям пользоваться Spatial, если они являются просто зрителями, если они приходят сюда поиграть.
It's a giant that's only going to get bigger and bigger. Back in 2019, I was saying this when Spatial didn't have that opportunity in terms of architecture, in terms of quality, in terms of the avatars that are walking around here. And honestly, if I had a little bit more confidence,
Еще в 2019 году я об этом говорила, когда у Spatial не было такой возможности по архитектуре, по качеству и по аватарам, которые здесь гуляют. И, честно говоря,
I would have probably bought the stock of Spatial back then. Because I think it's going to grow, and actually, Spatial, please contact me.
тогда, потому что я верю в то, что он будет расти. И вообще, Spatial, свяжитесь со мной, пожалуйста.
You owe me a percentage for advertising.
Spatial.
Spatial simply provides a better and more accessible format for interaction and insight into how to interact with the metaverse today.
Сегодня.
Ну и плюс нам очень хотелось...
And
мне
also,
очень-
we really wanted to... I really wanted to do this exhibition, because there are no exhibitions like this in Finland. Only the Finnish National Museum has a metaverse exhibition, but they just recreated the pavilion in virtual reality. There is a completely different approach.
Там совершенно другой подход.
Классная точка для того,
Great!
чтобы как раз-
This is the perfect place to talk about your approach and how you realized it. You didn't just limit yourself to a white cube, images, or videos. You have interactive elements that make your approach special. Could you tell us more?
В первую очередь,
First of all, I think that anyone who begins to immerse themselves more or less in the digital, in virtual worlds, in the metaverse,
виртуальные миры, метаверс,
begins to notice that most of the time, because we are just beginning to encounter this culture,
что мы как бы только начинаем.
people tend to bring in something understandable and familiar.
Свойственно привносить сюда
That's why we see so many exhibition spaces that repeat the architecture of a standard space.
пространств, которые повторяют архитектуру,
We see pedestals that aren't fucking necessary at all.
которые вообще нахрен по сути.
Oh, can I say that?
Можно говорить?
Of course you can.
Не нужны.
Yets are not needed at all in the metaverse because an object can exist without a stand.
Может существовать без
In life, you need a stand to keep it from falling.
чтобы он не упал.
So we're just at the stage of understanding how VR works.
В этапе понимания того,
And we really want to start exploring it from the other side.
очень хочется
We don't want to go into the experience that we can create with you in reality.
тот опыт, который мы можем сделать.
Why? Because basically, if you work really hard, you can make anything that lends itself to the laws of physics happen in life,
Физическим законом можно
if you really want to. In VR, we have the opportunity to get away from these limits that the physical world puts on us.
рамок, которые нам задает физический мир.
I think this is the philosophy of almost every third person who dives into this industry,
Человек, кто погружается в эту
if you can call it that, and starts to notice and experiment.
замечать и экспериментировать.
And I think it was on the basis of these values that I found a COP, the architectural studio that helped us with this project.
Студию архитектуры, которая нам помогала с этим проектом.
I have been working with a COP for a long time. We have experimented with creating virtual platforms for other brands.
Для других брендов. И, соответственно,
And so our values and our philosophy that you can do things in VR that you can't do in physics brought us together and helped us achieve the results we're seeing now.
вот тех результатов, которые мы видим сейчас. Наверное, это все идет.
I think it all comes down to a desire to get away from the physical and show a new experience.
Вы, получается, вместе штормили?
It turns out you stormed together and conceptualized the space, including the hills, architecture, etc. Or did you give them full freedom to come up with their ideas? What was the process like?
Этот процесс.
В моей системе управления я достаточно давно
In my management system, I've been curating a lot of similar projects for a long time,
талантливого
and I have the task of finding a talented creator and giving him or her a real opportunity to fantasize,
удостоверившись
only by first making sure that this creator can create something unrealistic.
что-то нереальное. То есть, например,
So, for example, with Alex, Sasha, this is the architect who built the site of a COP.
площадку от АИКОП.
We had a history of working together on other projects, and I knew for sure that I could trust her 100%.
Знала, что ей я доверяю на 100%, и мне нужно просто дать ей вводные.
And I just have to give her introductions and some direction, and from there, it was one person's inspiration and brainstorming in interaction with the work of our artists.
Как раз работами наших художников. Мое включение как
My involvement as a curator was only at the stage of some symbolic things,
символических вещей, то есть расположение маршрута,
the location of the route and comments based on where the work or the description of the work might be.
находиться работы или описание работы.
The architecture that we see now, these woods, hills, swamps, as we sometimes call this site,
Мы иногда называем
were actually created in the process of dialogue between the artist and the architect.
диалога художника и архитектора.
Мария, Эрнест, можете ли вы, пожалуйста,
Maria, please tell us more about the general idea of your project.
какой-то общий основной?
Ну, собственно, сама,
This work itself belongs to the Sad Broken Toys series.
не знаю, как ее по-английски я ее называю Sad Broken Toys, по-русски как-то я ее редко.
This series consists of objects that, on the one hand, have a kind of toy childish, maybe a little bit of a carnival aesthetic,
Такую игрушечно какую-то детскую, может быть, немножко эстетику.
and on the other hand, are not like something. They are sad, broken, strange.
Ломаные, странные. И над этой серией я начала работать, ну, собственно,
And I started working on this series in February 2022, and since then it has developed gradually.
работу мы делали как раз вместе.
We made 2 works together with Ernest. This one and Rhythm. The first work, Rhythm, is an installation of 20-something hares in wooden boxes, banging their heads against the walls of their boxes with motors. It's an endless visual and sound thing,
Ну и русалка, собственно, в той же немножко эстетике.
and Mermaid is actually in the same aesthetic. It's a Ferris wheel where you can ride around and see everything. And in the cabins, they record the screams of our friends.
Наших друзей. Наши друзья добровольно пожертвовали.
Our friends volunteered their voices. You could record on my page your scream about what was happening in our brave new world. And it actually generated quite a lively response.
Отклик тоже для людей это было, с одной стороны, прикольно.
It was fun for people on the one hand and therapeutic on the other. And it was really interesting to hear those screams one after the other.
То есть то, что мы сейчас слышим, это такой замешанный замес.
So what we are hearing now is such a mixed thing, and I got separate voices, so to speak. They were very different, from almost giggling and jokingly recording something to a kind of whispering.
Да, каких-то таких, как будто шепотом, видимо, кто-нибудь записывает в квартире.
Obviously, someone is recording in the apartment, and you can't shout in a bad voice. The neighbors will be frightened. A friend of mine went into the woods to record a real scream. I mean, all these different voices.
Такие разные голоса.
Then I combined all these sounds into a complex soundtrack that sounds inside.
Звуковую дорожку, которая там внутри звучит.
Очень впечатляюще выглядит колесо.
The wheel looks really impressive, especially against the green sun, and it's interesting to look at it from different angles. You mentioned that your previous works have been more offline, as we understood. This work is online, at Spatial. Was it specifically created for Spatial? Or can it be adapted for other spaces, including offline exhibitions?
The mermaid herself actually started out as just such a material object. I mentioned that I think I'm working a lot with paper at the moment, and I made a card where there was a graphic version of this mermaid. And you can turn this paper wheel, and she screams. It's like the letters are spinning. When I found out about this exhibition and that it was all going to be in Spatial, it seemed like I wanted to develop this object in some way. Well, in a sense, of course. It is already a separate work. The one we see here. It's just that it has a paper predecessor. And it was made, yes, specifically for this exhibition and specifically for Spatial. Ernest and I worked out what would work and how it would work. Because where else can you make it so that it is not clear how many meters high it is, and you can ride on it, and at the same time it is safe and does not fall down? And you don't have to think about physics.
What kind of experience did you envision for visitors, and how well did you think it through? Did you have an idea that visitors might find themselves next to the sun, moon, or other luminaries in the sky? Could they find themselves in a swamp or climbing on the roofs of buildings? Or, for example, we walked in and the first thing we randomly started doing was that we started moving objects because they were movable. What were your thoughts on that when creating the space?
Я думаю, что это изначально заложено.
I think that is the inherent story behind any gamified platform.
Задача игрока, зайдя в игру, найти баг. И это, знаете...
The player's job is to go into the game and find the bug, and that's one of the features. There are really big communities of people who specifically check games for bugs, secret messages, and things like that. I think our platform today has this quality of playing with bugs and secrets so that a person has the opportunity to explore the site, so that a person has the opportunity to discover worlds that are, well, actually not visible and inaccessible. Then a person will feel like a player, will feel special.
Человек будет себя чувствовать, игрок будет себя чувствовать особенным. Он раскрывает площадку для себя самостоятельно.
They unlock the platform for themselves just as we explore the forest in real life. We don't know what's behind that rock. And it's the same here. I mean, we didn't know. Not us. But, I mean, the players might not know what's behind the hills, a beautiful light or a green sunset. Anyway, it's very important, and it was discussed. And we thought about it. It's as if it wasn't so much thought about the itinerary and the logistics. No, there was no such thing.
Не так сильно продумывалось до маршрута и логистики, нет, такого не было.
There was just a process of creation, an artistic process of creation, at the end of which we got this result and an opportunity to go somewhere and to wander and to end up in a completely different place.
Совсем другом месте.
То есть вы не расстраиваетесь, когда
So you don't get frustrated when visitors move the explication labels, because actually we did it quite often.
у нас случайно это получалось.
На самом деле, в этом же и есть суть геймификации.
That's what gamification is all about. If there was a way, and I think Unity will give you that you could discover new symbols by moving some objects, that would be even cooler. But honestly, I didn't realize that I might have forgotten to fix some of the labels.
Какие-то таблички. В жизни я бы сильно расстроилась, если бы...
In real life, I'd be pretty upset if someone accidentally ripped off my explication label or something, and here there's an option to respawn it and make it back. But thanks for pointing out that some of the labels are moving.
Вот вы сказали, что, да, начали там специально разбираться в spatial, чтобы понять, как это.
You said that, yes, you started to learn about spatial in order to understand how to construct it, how to create it. Can you tell us more about the process of working, the process of assembling this installation? How did it happen?
Ну вот скетч был нарисован Машей.
Well, the sketch was drawn by Masha. All I can tell you about my part
Я это все в блендере замоделил примерно.
is that I modeled it all in the blender. We worked out how it could move through the mouth.
Частично я как бы сохранил паттерны, которые Маша уже нарисовала.
Partly I kept the patterns that Masha had already drawn in this picture, that she uses, and that are present in her art style.
И частично я фантазировал, как вообще может выглядеть.
And partly I fantasized about what this crazy mermaid could look like in her own style.
Затем вот Маша из этой модели с текстурами уже сделала.
And then, Masha made a real wheel out of this textured model, and it turns quite well.
Ну да, у нас...
We were like this. My paper graphics. I sent Ernest a picture, and Ernest did his shamanism. I'm the kind of person who always works in black and white. I don't really understand color. We are not friends with it. I usually don't care about it. And Ernest has taken my black and white and turned it into this completely colored phantasmagoria. I'm always terribly happy when we work together, because it's those moments when something turns into 3D. I already love the way Ernest makes a kind of colored space out of some of my graphic minimalist things. And then, yeah, he sent me a model, and I gave him a little bit of advice on how to break everything down into pieces so that it would be convenient for me to program it. Because I'm no stranger to programming. I don't do it professionally, but I know how to do it. So I honestly just went through a tutorial on the basics of Unity, then I dug into Toolkit Spatial, and figured out how to program it all so that it would spin, scream, and roll around in it.
Там уже как это все запрогать, чтобы оно и крутилось, и кричало, и кататься в нем можно было. И мой любимый момент из работы...
And my favorite moment of working on the mermaid was when I started to add all the spinning and physics to it. I started the preview, and the mermaid fell very dramatically under the ground into hell. That's just my favorite blooper.
Это когда ты его...
Was that when you already put it in the space of this exhibition?
Не, еще...
I was still testing it on this default idyllic island in Spatial. There were palm trees and the sea. As soon as the mermaid had physics, wait. She happily fell under the ground.
Ну да, до этого мы смотрели на русалку.
Yes, that's right. We had looked at the mermaid in Spatial before, but that was in the test room. I had placed a chair there, a glass of wine, and we were looking at her in virtual space. We had a kind of vernissage.
How do you think the openings in meta-universes should go?
Мне кажется, должен быть квест, который доступен как бы всегда.
I think there should be a quest that is available throughout the exhibition, and at the opening, some kind of live interaction is added as part of that quest.
Существует.
Такая метавселенная медиация.
Мета-медиация.
Such a meta-universe mediation. Meta-mediation.
Мне кажется, когда заходишь, ничего не зная...
I think when you walk in and you don't know anything about an exhibition, it's sometimes unclear what the next object to see, or what is better. I think a quest could solve that problem, and it seems like a natural step.
Проблему решить, ну и просто он как-то напрашивается даже.
По поводу того, как должно проходить открытие...
In terms of how an opening, well, an event in general should be run at the venue, you know what I've faced with and I'm still meeting? It's really about communication on the site and explaining to people where to go. Because you get lost in the room and it's very hard to explain where to go. Like right and left when the characters don't even have the opportunity to raise their hand right or left. And because people are coming in for the first time and they don't know how to run and jump at all, and that's probably the first thing you meet.
Бегать и прыгать. И это, наверное, самое первое, с чем ты сталкиваешься.
What was the challenge for the artists, especially those who had no experience in these spaces? Was it complicated or was it easy?
Сложно, легко.
У нас были российские художники и приглашенные художники, которые живут в Финляндии.
We had Russian artists and guest artists living in Finland or the Baltic countries. It happened so, I think we had an immediate contact with the Russian artists, and the task was clear. Maybe they just had more experience. Well, not all of them. Our guest artists had no experience at all. For them, the metaverse seemed to be something scary, and it happened that they didn't immediately understand what we wanted them to do. So it seemed they were a bit afraid that we wanted them to create something themselves, and that's why they sat in silence for a while. That was probably the main difficulty, because they were afraid of the sight. They were uncomfortable. But when it turned out that we just wanted them to sketch out their ideas, how they would like to place their works, how they would see the works in another space, everything became much easier. On the Russian side, we have amazing artists.
Гораздо легче. Но с российской стороны у нас были и есть потрясающие художники. На самом деле все потрясающие и замечательные, но
Well, all our artists are amazing and wonderful. So the ones that were easiest to work with were Maria Fox Larson and Alexei Ryabov. It was our first meeting. He immediately knew what he wanted to do and immediately gave us the idea of a bug in the gallery. He immediately made a sketch. And in general, it turned out to be a very cool, if you go through the portal, a very cool site.
Maria, how long did it take you to figure out and create all this from scratch? And if another artist wants to try it, how difficult is it without any experience in digital?
Мне кажется, что на самом деле сложности какие-то есть, но в принципе...
I think there are some difficulties, but everything is quite realistic. There's information about everything on the internet. There's Google and YouTube and lots of people asking the same questions as you. I mean, if you want some kind of interactivity, it's probably desirable, more or less, to understand some basic programming logic, but not at the, oh, I'm such an incredible programmer level, but generally to understand that there are repetitive actions. I don't know, some things like that. I think in English it is called not rocket science.
Мне кажется, это называется not rocket science. Вот это, короче, это не rocket science.
На самом деле у всех был разный опыт там, знакомства с виртуальной реальностью, с диджиталом в целом.
In fact, everyone had a different experience with virtual reality, with digital in general, with our artists. And that's what I liked the most, because 2 years ago we worked with Fox Larson on a project by Marina Gisic and iBiom. The spatial was very different then, and at that time we were thinking mostly in 2D images. We were going through the very phase of transferring the real into the virtual that we are now trying to move away from. It was very interesting for me to see how the authors with whom I started this journey felt in this new space. And they showed their results. They showed that they had learned to understand and feel the platform, and it was quite an interesting experience.
Они научились понимать и чувствовать площадку, и это было достаточно интересный опыт.
I've been doing one virtual project a year for the last 3 years. My first virtual project was in the Mozilla hubs. It was a sculpture of 3 dead pigeons, floating above the ground, stacked in a pyramid, with the sky shining through them. I searched all over St. Petersburg for a dead pigeon. My friends found one for me. They called me. They gave me the coordinates. And I rushed off in a taxi so that, God forbid, the janitor would not take my dead pigeon. I photographed it from every angle and made a 3D sculpture of it. It was, of course, a story that, at that stage, was more about sculpture than community. So basically, the whole meta-universe thing is still quite new to me. But I feel like after looking at it all through real VR glasses at the exhibition, not from a browser window, I got hooked, I think. Apparently VR glasses aren't too far away either. More meta-universes aren't too far as well.
Второй опыт у тебя был связан тоже...
And your second experience was also with Mozilla?
Второй как раз был в Spatial. Мы тогда...
The second experience was with Spatial. We were working together with Asi at that time. It was a project called In Silico. In this project, I did not collaborate with Ernest, but with another colleague, my friend and husband. We created a series of neural network bunnies using quite sophisticated data processing techniques.
Мне бесконечно было интересно.
I was very interested to see how artists who had never experienced this before would behave. That's why we did these sessions at the beginning, where we took each of the artists very gently by the hand and said things like, "Look, oh, it's a wonderful new world. Let's create something beautiful here." And everyone reacted differently. There were reactions like, "Why would I need it? I don't want to do that. I really like physics." There were reactions like, "I'm afraid we're going to be swallowed up by a virtual world." And there were reactions like, "Wow, now I can make anything I want." And those reactions are absolutely different. As my colleague Sasha from ACOP says, we are taking people's VR virginity away. It's a phrase I love so much, and I guess you could say, I hope I don't get canceled, but I'm a VR virgin maniac.
Если это было по согласию, то хорошо все.
If it was consensual, it's fine.
Но никто не против. Соответственно, вот
Everything was consensual, but sometimes with surprises, but nobody minded. Oh. And so these reactions and the final results of the artists are always pleasing, because despite the fact that there were those who were frightened, they still created or gave us something from the real world. We were able to somehow give it an interesting context on the set. But at the end of the day, my personal opinion is that absolutely every artist gave an incredible result on that platform. Even if it was somebody's first time, somebody had only heard about it, and here we are. And in the dialogue between architect and artist, this is what we got.
Получилось то, что получилось.
Мне кажется, что вот в этой выставке действительно очень...
I think that in this exhibition, the space itself is really great. It kind of revives and complements the context of the objects so that they start to play even more expressively.
Начинают прям играть еще сильнее.
Я очень сильно, бывает, погружаюсь в виртуальный мир.
When I immerse myself in a virtual world, I try to imagine myself where my character is. I especially like spaces that can be explored, like here, where you can walk on the hills. And artificial boundaries seem very distant. I'm very interested in finding some of my own passholes that the author sometimes didn't plan for.
Находить какие-то свои пасхалки, которых автор не закладывал иногда.
Да, и еще важно сказать, что на этой площадке мы еще попробовали повзаимодействовать.
And it's also important to say that on this set, we tried to interact with portals. We have 3 artists with portals to other rooms and 2 artists with internal portals within the venue. So it's all about exploring the venue and how to interact with it. This was done so that, for example, Nikita has a room with a performance, and we realized that the possibilities of the venue today would simply not be able to cope. In addition to the main venue, a large number of people and complex objects, there is also a performance.
Большое количество людей, сложных объектов, еще и перформанс.
Что бы вы могли посоветовать и художникам, и...
What advice can you give to artists and curators who want to make a project or a whole exhibition, or even a space in some meta-universe, already based on your experience?
Не бояться пробовать, потому что здесь не может быть ошибок. Если в жизни...
You shouldn't be afraid to experiment because there is no room for mistakes. Unlike the real world where physical limitations, budget, and so on, in the meta-universe, everything is available. Even an artist who is interacting with digital technology for the first time can download free 3D objects from the internet and build a house. Here, the space for experimentation is completely free, which is so great.
Может не радовать.
Мы с Эрнестом делали русалку, и я сидела...
Ernest and I were making a mermaid, and I was sitting at my little 13-inch laptop, testing everything in the browser, and I could only see everything on the test island. I came to Helsinki for the opening of a physical exhibition. I don't live very far away. And there was a VR headset. And I came in and it's like this incredible space, surreal. And this mermaid, which is suddenly really big. Because when you look at it in the monitor, you understand it in your brain that it is big because your avatar is small. And this object is much, much bigger. When you look at it in that kind of real VR, it's a totally cosmic sense of scale. For me, it was just a really cool experience. As an artist, I don't get a lot of opportunities in my life to do a gigantic thing like this in an urban environment, for example. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's unsafe. And then suddenly it turns out that you can just inhabit a universe with your crazy ideas and at the same time experience it as a version of reality. It's really cool.
И при этом ощущать их как какую-то такую вот версию реальности. Очень прикольно.
Сегодня мы, взрослые тети, можем лазить по...
Today, we, adult ladies, can climb objects, and that is our job. And tomorrow, every office will probably have a virtual replica and be able to interact with their employees from all over the world. That has a potential, I
У
believe
этого есть
in.
потенциал, в который я верю.